Hello and welcome to the Crisis Response Podcast, a show about the regular folks who are tackling major problems and transforming how communities watch out for each other. I'm your host, Jason Friesen, and on the show today, how Andrew Woods built Hartford Communities That Care into Connecticut's preeminent violence intervention program, responding to more than 2,000 violent crimes. Hartford Communities That Care provides crisis response, mental health, and supportive programs to improve the lives of youth and adult victims of crime and their families. Joining Andrew, we'll also be speaking with Shenell Benjamin, Director of the Hartford Care Response Team, and Tyrone Bynum, Senior Intervention Specialist. Hey, welcome. Today we are joined by the Hartford Community That Cares organization based in Hartford, Connecticut, and they are involved in violence intervention and prevention and also with drug-free communities. We are joined today by three folks from Hartford Community That Cares, including Andrew Woods, the Executive Director, Shenell Benjamin, Director of the Hartford Care Response Team, and Ty Bynum, who's with a Crisis Intervention Specialist. Thank you very much for joining us today. It's a real pleasure to have you all here. And I think to get started, Andrew, if you could just tell us about Hartford Communities That Care and how you got started and what your focus is.
Yes, certainly. Well, thanks again for this opportunity to connect with you guys on your platform, and looking forward to the work that partnership that we're going to be having with Beacon. In 1998, we actually started the organization as a mentoring organization, but by 2004, we pivoted towards, in addition to mentoring, we pivoted towards crisis intervention, 24/7 response to victims of to support victims of violent crime. And primarily, we established at the time the first hospital violence intervention program in the state of Connecticut, or what we call a hospital-linked violence intervention program, to where when a call comes through for victims of violent crime, our agency is called to receive, one, to connect with the families and victims and make sure that when they're discharged from the hospital, provided they survive, that our case management and our team follow up with them with wraparound service supports. And so, as I mentioned earlier, we're 24/7, 365-day response team. It's been that way since we started back in 2004. And since then, we have served over 2,000 victims of violent crime here in the greater Hartford area.
Fantastic. That's just incredible work that you're doing. How did you come into this? How did you go from no program, no organization existing to get involved in this and then to really take on all the activities that you do?
Well, pretty much there was a need that took place. Is that one, as I indicated earlier, we are primarily doing prevention work, leadership development work that we still currently do today with one of our other programs now called the Greater Hartford Youth Leadership Academy. But unfortunately, during that time, we're working with middle and high school young people doing the prevention, intervention, and leadership development work. There were also a spike in youth violence, particularly gun violence, with folks, young people in the 7th and 8th and middle and high school age range. And typically what would happen is that if a victim of gun violence, a young person was shot, they obviously had to go to a hospital. And it was during that time that we noticed that when young people were admitted to the hospital, many friends, anywhere up to 200 folks, would land at the hospital just to see what's going on, friends, family members, etc. And the hospital would go into lockdown because they wasn't sure exactly who the family members were or who their friends were, and there were safety concerns. And what we decided with the hospital was say, hey, look, why don't you do this? Anytime there's a shooting victim that comes in, give us a call and we'll come down and we'll work with you to sort through who's who. But also we wanted to make sure that they got access to a private room to where they can get updates from nursing staff, from doctors, and then to make sure that we were able to follow up and support those victims and their families afterwards. But really, it emerged out of a need to make sure that victims and their families were receiving the support that they needed at the hospital, in the hospital setting and at crime scenes.
And what gave you the experience or the know-how to be able to get involved in this, right? It seems like there wasn't any kind of formal training. You just recognized the need and got involved, but clearly you had some experience and know-how to be able to get involved in an effective way.
Well, my background is that I have a public health background in addition to a social work background. And so I've always done work from a public health standpoint with dealing with issues around drug dependency, dealing with HIV and AIDS at that time, which was significant during the early 90s, late 80s. And so understanding public health practices and principles, and also understanding what some of the best practices are related to dealing with at-risk youth and young people, especially those victimized, it didn't take much for me to generate and think about what would be some effective strategies to address this issue.
Did you have any collaboration with other practitioners, or were you on your own working this out?
Yeah, primarily, with the schools, with law enforcement, with schools, with the hospitals, with other service providers, mental health providers, medical providers, other youth development organizations that were working with young people. So pretty much, when you're building anything, you really want to take a look at the universe of who else is out there that can actually support and sustain and young people, and especially around safety issues, and also helping to improve their quality of life.
Right. So it started, I imagine, with you and some colleagues being involved in direct intervention, but then it got to the point where you launched a dedicated Hartford care response team that Shenell is now the director of. How did you go from single interventions, one at a time, to putting together a full proper team?
Well, that took some time, because initially there wasn't a lot of investments in this area. And even now there's challenges, the investments are just beginning to trickle into this industry, if you will. And so it's really volunteerism. It was really committed individuals like myself, a gentleman by the name of Brother Kyle Hardrick, both him and I, another gentleman named Chuck Cummins. It was really just a group of individuals who were already embedded in the community, who had an interest in making sure that that young people were safe, and that they wanted to make sure that they had the best opportunities possible. So really calling and relying on colleagues and friends and other volunteers, we were able to eventually build out a program along with board members and advisors to be able to create something that will eventually attract the resources needed to sustain these efforts over time.
Excellent. So Shenell, now you're the director of the Hartford Care Response Team. And if you could walk us through, what does that consist of? Makes it a formal team as opposed to a collection of volunteers who come in every once in a while, or however it may work?
Well, what makes this a formal team is that we have the crisis interventionist, which includes Ty, as well as additional members as part of that team. And then we have the case managers that work together to ensure that the wraparound services are provided to these families that are in need, which includes connecting them to nursing care, to primary care physicians, to assisting with employment or any for that matter. So it just provides a different setup that a lot of people aren't quite used to receiving. So it's a good place to be.
So what are the official roles involved in the team? You mentioned the interventionist, which is Ty, and we'll get to Ty, but also case managers. What are the formal roles that you have?
So the two formal roles, well, you have me, in which I oversee the case managers as well as the intervention specialists. And then you have the intervention specialists, which Ty will get deeper into, but they respond to the hospital and to the crime scene. They respond 24/7, 365. And the information that they get from that crime scene, they bring along over to me and the case management team as well. And we debrief on whatever that incident is. And we provide we reach out to the family within 24 to 48 hours, depending on if it's a during the week event or over the weekend. We'll probably do that first thing Monday morning. We debrief on the incident and then make that call to the family. And the importance of the debrief is to ensure that we communicate, we take the temperature of the family to see, we may be dealing with a homicide, or we may be dealing with a very tough situation in which the family may have requested just additional space at that time, and to call them probably not that Monday, maybe that Tuesday. So that debrief and that communication plays a significant role in making sure that we follow through and execute on the needs of that family, it shows that we're listening. And then that case, we schedule a home visit or an office visit if that's what they prefer. And we connect with that family see what services they need, and that case manager and that intervener that actually responded to that hospital, they meet with the family and just take off from there with whatever services or needs that they said they would need in order to start that healing process and assessing what happened to that traumatic event that happened to them.
Great, thank you for sharing all that.
You're welcome.
Ty, I guess it would be really useful to hear from you. Walk us through, how does this actually happen, right? Where the moment the call comes in that you're needed to the resolution, or at least until you are able to pass it off. How do those steps?
Typically, or idealistically, what will happen is Mr. Woods would get a phone call from the hospital alerting us that we had a victim of crime, may it be a gunshot victim, a stabbing victim, a physical assault, anything pertaining to a blunt force or injury. And Mr. Woods will call myself and alert me about the hospital and the situation or circumstance. Then I would reach out to the team and alert everyone that we have to meet at the hospital for the circumstance. And our goal, and we've been landing this goal recently a lot, is getting to the hospital within 15 minutes or under. We arrive at the hospital setting. We greet the security guards. They're familiar with who we are and what we do. We go inside, meet with the charge nurse, exchange information as far as demographics, male, female, race, gender, etc. Then once it's almost safe to do so, we have an opportunity to meet the victim bedside. And at the time of meeting the victim bedside, we're feeling how they feel first before it's bigger than just providing the service, because even if they decline wanting services, we'll still stay until they're either discharged or the family feels that they are safe enough to take over. So aside from the provision of services, we try to assure emotional support for the victims and let them know you have individuals that's here to advocate for you, maybe for law enforcement, the nurses, or family for that matter. So we develop a relationship with the victim at bedside. Do we have other team members while we have those in the back that's actually in the front meeting the arriving friends and families? And like Mr. Woods stated earlier, you never really know how many family or friends you may encounter. It could go from one husband to being 30 family members outside. So our team that's out front usually meet with the family, find individuals who they can contact with, collect information just in case the family may also need some type of wraparound services and supports. And they get an ideal of the circumstances of the individual, what they would need upon release, meaning they may need a relocation, they may want clinical therapy, they may want other services to help not only themselves, but their family be on the road to safety. So once we're completing those tasks, we take all the demographic information, all of the information that took place at the hospital scene, like Shenell mentioned, the temperature of the family, the attitudes, we document all of that. Then we get it to Shenell the same night, her and Mr. Woods the same night, in detail, typed up, everything they need. And then the case team take that information and they perform magic like no other. So that's how it goes from the initial phone call all the way down to when Shenell gets it and she already went into detail about the protocols that the case management team does. And that's the house visits with the interveners. When we get there, 9 times out of 10, if not all the time, the victim, if they're able to remember, because they just went through a traumatic shock, or sometimes they're medicated, so they may not always remember who they spoke to. That's why it's important we build with the family too. So in the event that the victim don't remember us, we have an aunt, a mother, a sister, a brother, or somebody who remembers us being there. And once that warm handoff is passed off and we could not give them, but work with the case management team to give them the services, it becomes a family-oriented type of process after that. It really, you learn to develop these relationships. You learn to be completely transparent and empathetic, and it becomes more than a call of duty.
Yeah, I imagine you're walking into some really tense situations. How do you prepare yourself for that? What's in the top of your mind as you're walking into, Andrew mentioned up to 200 people showing up at the hospital, or even if it's just 30, that's emotions are running high and, fingers are being pointed. And what's your state of mind? What are you telling yourself to stay on top of things and make sure that you're able to both deliver the services that are needed but also keep yourself safe too. How does that work?
I'll accredit that to three things. The first, personal experience in heightened situations or risky circumstances, or even when death is around. Just me being in those certain circumstances throughout my lifetime, and just knowing how to not be numb, but to put certain things on the back burner. I think I developed that, and that helped me a lot. The second thing, the training provided by not only Mr. Woods and the best practices that we often study on, but just knowing what works absolutely without having to do too much changing. And third, just the personal intention and wanting to be a part of the solution and wanting to be a part of the healing process. Those three elements keep me grounded every single call.
That's fantastic stuff. I mean, that's really right to the core of it. About this training, Andrew, can you talk more about the training that you provide? I imagine this is a lot of, you developed it yourself.
Well, I would say yes and no to some extent. I mean, clearly, when you're early into this, you really, one is that we value the perspective and the expertise of folks, colleagues across the country. So even early on, when we were developing the program, I really relied on looking at what other folks were doing across the country. Chicago, Boston was my two primary cities that I had looked to because I knew some of the work that they were doing. And so really, it wasn't about reinventing the wheel. It was really about seeing what best practices or strategies that they're implementing there that might be helpful with us. Obviously, you want to adapt it to your local condition, and clearly because of what you know about your own environment and so forth. But over the years, it continues to be a refinement of our own strategies based on what we've learned personally. Shenell in her role, she continues to refine her strategies on how to engage, how to support families. And same thing with Ty and their teams. Is always an evolution, or the practices evolve based on, just history, based on circumstances, based on, what your experiences. But clearly, we're also a part of a national network of folks that do hospital violence intervention programs, street level intervention programs, to where there is a plethora of best practices that are out there that are recognized federally through our grant federal funders, state funders, best practice based on research and implementation of these programs. And so we attend conferences. We also engage in ongoing professional development, whether it's in-service, our own in-service trainings, whether it's something that they staff do independently in their own time or on staff time, as well as certainly when we attend local or regional or statewide conferences to connect with colleagues. So, certainly it's all about making sure you still connect with what other folks are doing. And that also helps you, again, keep your tool sharp as well.
So the name of the national network, what is that for any listeners who might be interested in learning more as well?
Absolutely. It's the Health Alliance for Violence Intervention, short for the HAVI. The Health Alliance for Violence Intervention is our national trade association. And so anyone that wants to do this work that is really the go-to source to understand hospital violence intervention programs. What does it take to create one? What does it take to maintain one? What do you need to do? Bottom line is that they are our network. And you're connecting with colleagues and opportunities. But basically, the HAVI is the go-to trade association for those that do this work.
Excellent. Thank you. I want to get back to you about those 2 points about how to create one and how to maintain one. But before I do that, I'd like to ask Shenell, could you talk a little bit about the partnerships that you have to maintain to ensure that you're able to deliver the services? I mean, I know you had mentioned the hospital, the police department. I'm sure you're also involved with, churches and other community organizations. How do you establish your care response team as a respected and authoritative organization that is able to deliver services? What kind of partnerships does that take, and how do you maintain those?
Well, first and foremost, since we are a community-based organization, our first partnership is the community. They're number one. So we are out here, besides being with, seeing, with the fire department, the hospital, and that is beautiful. That is nice. But we are also outside in the community, attending community events, talking to the individuals of the community, seeing how we could assist in bettering the community that we're a part of. We're just not a building here. We're people here. We work here. We enjoy seeing children smiling and playing. And so when the community gets to see us in the community, then they know that there's a community. Just like you see your fire departments and you see your police officers and EMTs and everyone else, the churches, when you see them in a community, okay, there's a certain level of community that you get. So with additional partnerships outside of the community, I would say that it's pretty easy to actually gather those because I'm a people person. Gaining insight on somebody else's organization and how they do things, and we're all open to learning, as Mr. Woods and Ty pointed out, as far as trainings are concerned. We just attended a training in a conference in Boston on Tuesday, and we met people that were a part of this line of work as well. And the learning aspect of that was beautiful. So the partnerships is no brainer. It's just there, but partnership, it can be established to better us and assist the community. We're all for it.
Yep, that makes a lot of sense. Absolutely. Very well said. Ty, if I can ask you, let's say that there are folks out there who want to get involved. They want to be doing exactly what you do. What would you look for, or what would you recommend to them, the right type of person to take on the role that you've got? If you were going to go recruit more folks to join your team, what would you be looking for?
That's a good question. I personally feel like there's no cookie cutter answer to that because everybody in the communities have something to offer. There's no absolute or list of qualifications that you need to meet to do this work. Essentially, you just have to care. Once you care, everything else will find a way to take care of itself, because in these communities, once someone realizes someone cares, it opens up the fence for so many opportunities, because essentially everybody wants to care and know someone cares. So it's not really a list of qualifications as far as being on time or being strong or being like, those things are great, but the number one quality, if you will, that overrides all of that is just being caring and being genuine and sincere with intention. If you have an intention to be sincere and genuine and caring for these individuals, I have no issues working with you.
Pretty straightforward. That makes it easy, but it's also really, really succinct in terms of what you're looking for. So let's get back, if I can, Andrew, to what you were talking about. Let's say there's a community out there that wants to do exactly what you're doing, and they're starting from ground zero, right? They've got nothing other than the inspiration, and as Ty mentioned, they care. They want to get involved. What would you recommend to them, broad stroke steps that they've got to do to get up and running?
Well, I think it boils down to, one, establishing relationships, and I think both Shenell and Ty, it ties back to the relationships and partnerships. And so really, if you don't have those two things, then you really can't expect to start or maintain or sustain anything, quite frankly, because this whole effort, this program, these services are all based on trust and gaining trust from those that you want to serve and support and help. And so if anyone that wants to engage in this work really need to be individuals or organizations that already have established a network or a degree of trust within the community and among providers, or be willing to put the time in to establish those. And so both can happen, but it's not an overnight deal. They need to be prepared for that. They also need to be prepared for setbacks. They need to be prepared for the ever ongoing challenges, one, creating and sustaining and even enhancing these kind of initiatives. And then it's always a constant raising awareness of the value of the program so that you can continue to gain the kind of support that you and the community deserves, or your organization and the community deserves. And so, which can all be frustrating, which can all be a challenge, but that's also a part of it all. And so really at the end of the day, if you really want to be a part of some of these movements, if you will, it really requires a great deal of resilience. It requires a great deal of focus, discipline, and being willing to check yourself, and also acknowledge the fact that some of this work can be frustrating, and then learn ways to deal with that frustration. And that's really probably the best advice I can give anyone along those lines. And obviously, again, cultivate relationships among funders, among people who can support these programs and services through resources. And again, even that, again, all of it is an ongoing process.
So you raised a couple good points there that I'd like to just ask a bit more about. How do you demonstrate value to the community? I mean, it's apparent just by talking with you, the value that you bring. But we both know that when you're going out talking to funders, you know, they're going to want more concrete, quantifiable impact. And what are those that you're normally sharing with them to say, this is how we can actually quantify our impact? What is the results that you're showing to them to convince them to fund your efforts?
Well, primarily two things. One, consistency. In that, one, funders do not want to support anything that is just fly by night. They don't want to fund and support projects and initiatives that just seem to pop up and then pop down, depending on whether or not a person gets the resources. But by the bottom line is that they really want to see whether you're in this for the long haul, and rather you have a true commitment to it. That's number one. Number two, you got to have the buy-in from the community to be able to say, not only support, and that's not the word I'm looking for, but basically to co-sign, to basically validate. You have to have stakeholders in the community that would validate the importance of the program. And again, that goes back to relationships and partnerships. In that if you have key stakeholders in the community that validate and willing to put their names on the line to say, hey, listen, you know what, this is a value to the community. And you also have people who you have served and support who are willing to step up and also testify to that, whether it's, you know, in platforms like this, or just to be able to come and share with their own family or colleagues or stakeholders such as lawmakers. Then that's another way of making sure that, you know, lawmakers don't want to necessarily hear a lot of data. They want to hear what the people think. They want to hear the stories. And so you got to make sure that we also are a part of that dynamic as well. And then, of course, the third thing is the data. And clearly the data and our outcomes are important to this work, because they also want to see who and how many have you served? What were the outcomes? What can you demonstrate based on your data in terms of how effective you were with helping these families or individuals? And that also takes time to generate. And it's not as quick as 1 year or 2 years. Oftentimes it's multiple of years to be able to generate the data that can tell the story, not only the story on your impact, but also the story that says that we're in it for the long haul. And so, you know, I do want to pivot towards an example, and that goes to why we're talking with you, with Beacon, is that, you know, as Ty pointed out, you know, on average, our response time to the hospital was less than 15 minutes. And it's always been that way. And so we're one of the few HVIPs in the nation that actually have that kind of response mechanism in place. Typically, they may arrive within an hour or two. In some cases, it's less than that. But by and large, or they may wait for the victim to be discharged, then they receive the referral and then provide the support in many cases. In our case, what happens is that we're able to, though we've always known what our response time was, when we look at the Beacon system, it allows us to actually even capture that in real time in terms of response. And now, so think a year or two out, what that might mean to demonstrate in the fact that we are, in fact, not only a nimble, but also a very effective response team to get the victims and families where it counts, which is during that acute stage. And so it's really all about collecting data such as what Beacon has and will continue to provide for us and could provide for us. But also it's all about all the other metrics that I pointed out, or other examples, such as, again, people's own willingness to testify or validate your program, in addition to some of the other data that's being captured by Shenell and her team from a case management standpoint. How many folks are utilizing what service? How often do they utilize that service? What are the conditions behind utilizing those services? All of this takes into account or helps to demonstrate or create a story that we can begin to tell folks about the program and to continue to gain support and resources to keep our program going on behalf of the community.
Absolutely. Being able to show the data, but then to put it all into context with real stories is just so important. If I could go over to Shenell, what if you were to get involved beyond your current areas, right? Let's say that you were going to be scaling your program, or maybe I should ask you, what is your goals for the program? Do you have any aspirations to scale it or to grow it or to expand into other areas? What do you see as the future for what you're doing in the Hartford Care Response Team?
Oh, of course. I feel like to not grow it means to stay stagnant and the community stays the same. And to think above and beyond now, I believe everyone has a particular vision that we wake up to. For a lot of people, it's a little broader than others, but you still have something that you have goals. So as far as the goals that I have, they're huge. They're huge. They require a lot of funding. But as far as seeing the community better, seeing the individuals that I work with better, and that we all go to sleep at night knowing that we made the community and ourselves better. One thing that I actually go off of is, I don't know if you know about the starfish story. So
No,
the starfish, okay, so I'll make it short. So the starfish story is about a young boy. He's on a beach, and I could be saying this slightly wrong, but bear with me. The young boy is on a beach and he's throwing starfish in the water. So there's thousands of starfish on the beach. So this young man, a gentleman, he's walking alongside the beach, and he approaches the young boy, and he's like, "What are you doing?" He said, "Well, the tide is starting to recede, and if I don't help these starfish, then they're gonna die." So he's like, "Sir, he's like, young man, respectfully, there's too many starfish out here for you to save them all." So the little boy looked at the older man, and he said, he picks up a starfish and he throws it in the water. And he tells him, "It mattered to that one." And so every morning and almost every night, that's the story that gets me through the day. Just to know, if we do just a little bit more, or if we just touch one, that it mattered to that one. So with the bigger picture, well, I mean, we're growing. I mean, we're taking on the software, the amazing software that you have. I mean, we've always tracked the numbers and collected data, but now we have something else that backs the numbers and everything that we've collected. And it just seems bright when we sit around the table and put everybody's pieces together, all these puzzles, like everybody, I mean, in our human form, but I see everybody as a little piece of this puzzle here within this agency. We fit, and everyone that we bring on board fits, and the people's lives that we touch, they become family. So no one's really a case number. They're family, regardless of age, and any demographic, you're automatically family. So just seeing this as not just work, but a family dynamic that allows us to go further. And I think the team in the community, but this amazing team, has gone above and beyond and continue to go above and beyond, to the point in which we kind of forget about ourselves. But I mean, the growth within each other, yeah, it's big. The vision is definitely really, really big. Hopefully I answered your question.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that means a lot. It really does. It's very easy to get bogged down, but to have that what you're doing, effort you're making is having an impact on somebody.
Like someone.
Really, really does a lot to keep things moving forward. Ty, I'm wondering if you could share, your quote unquote boots on the ground, right? And I'm wondering if you could share a particularly memorable intervention that you had where it kind of brought it all together for you. I'm sure everyone is unique and they all have different value, but maybe there's one that sticks out in your mind that you could share about where you really saw the value of what you were doing and the impact that the entire organization is having.
All right, I got one in particular that stands out because it touches a little close to home, but just to give a little background, prior to my first hospital responses, like I stated earlier, Mr. Woods and the team definitely trained me well. I had to learn a lot of numerical data and statistics that speak to the work. And one of those is almost, I believe, 1 out of 3 individuals, if not treated with these wraparound services, will return back to the hospital. In some cases, they're not always lucky enough to receive services. So this particular situation actually happened with my younger brother. He's not my blood brother, but I knew him since he was in 2nd grade. And prior to me being hired by the response team, these are individuals who I grew up with, like I stated earlier, about experiences. So these are young men that I know that are impulsive, have probably a few violent tendencies out of protection. And one time my younger brother was physically assaulted by a gunshot wound way before I got hired with this organization. And once I got hired by the organization and I'm reading these statistics about returning clients, and if certain clients don't receive these services, they have chances to be re-injured or in most cases, once again, murdered. And I think the 2nd month I got hired, we got a call to the hospital. We get to the hospital and lo and behold, it's my younger brother. You know what I'm saying? I seen his mother and I already knew what it was. And in that moment, I recognized the value of information and just knowing about services and why it's important, because now it's touched home and this is his 2nd time being injured by a gunshot wound. And I conveyed to him in so many ways, like, this is information I'm coming across and these numbers don't lie, bro. You may not be lucky again. Like, you know what I'm saying? So in those moments, those personalized moments, I've understood why these initiatives and organizations are not only necessary, but their effectiveness. And if it wasn't for the data, the training, and just the overall exposure to the backside of the work, I wouldn't be able to take this information and convey it to friends and family that I know are violent perpetuators or victims that's been perpetually victimized. So until they get to see the bigger picture from someone that can speak in a way that they can comprehend, it makes it a bit of a like in the dark circumstance. So after that particular circumstance, I tied the boots a little tighter. You know what I mean? Because now I've really seen the picture in which Shenell, Mr. Woods was trying to paint as far as how the work can be when it gets to be serious. And once I seen my brother, I realized like, okay, we can't play. We got to really be serious about getting these individuals wraparound services, being empathetic, and just realizing, like Shenell mentioned a lot of times, family. When you look at them as a family member, it's a different type of, we got to get them these services. We got to make sure they straight. We got to make sure they relocate or make sure they get therapy, or make sure when we go a house visit, we bring a pizza or a balloon or something to put that soft, warm touch on it. And once it hit home, it just really opened up all the stadium lights.
That's powerful. I really appreciate that. I can see absolutely when I was working as a paramedic, getting called, and you get called and it's your friend or family member that you're responding to. Mm-hmm. Just puts it in a whole new perspective.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for sharing. Andrew, is there anything else you'd like to share with the listeners before we wrap up here? Anything we didn't talk about?
No, I think we covered the waterfront in terms of, where we started at as an organization, the nature of the work, what goes into it, some of the impact that we have on the victims, the families, and certainly the overall community, and certainly being able to continue to elevate the importance of this work through your platform. And for those that will be listening or watching this program, we can only look for opportunities like this to keep elevating this message. And we appreciate the partnership with you and the Beacon folks.
Absolutely. It's really our pleasure and our honor to be able to support you. It really means so much to be able to reach the organizations that are on the ground making an impact. If people wanted to reach out to you, what would be the best way to get in contact?
I'll say our email. That's one way. And it's www.hartfordctc, that's Charlie Tom Charlie.org.
Excellent. HartfordCTC.org.
Correct.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, everyone. Really appreciate it. It's been awesome talking with you, learning about it, and we really look forward to continuing the collaboration. You're doing just awesome work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right.